Hey guys, I'm back at it again. And yeah, it's been like a week, maybe a month, but that wasn't really my fault. A lot of stuff happened. I got COVID. I wanted to play Devil May Cry 4. I beat it. I started streaming a little bit. And then, oh wait, actually, yeah, I actually stream now. So if you're into that, check the description. And yeah, I don't really have a schedule per se. I kind of stream whenever I want to. I'm actually streaming KO, the Kangaroo, the game that just came out, I believe, a couple weeks ago. So if you're into that, go ahead and see what's up. But without a further ado, we're actually going to be tackling Psychonauts, which is a game I've actually never personally played before. I've only seen Let's Player play it, and I've only seen other people give their opinions on it. From what I've seen and heard, it sounds like an amazing game, right up my alley. And so we're gonna be going ahead and sitting down talking about it to see if it's actually a game worth it, or if it's just a game that people overhyped or not. But first, let's get into the origin of Psychonauts. So this can be a long, semi-lengthy segment. I'll try to sum it up as best as I can. But first, it all started with Tim Schafer. Tim Schafer is the person who actually created the game and was pretty much the main drive towards it. He soon found his own company and a warehouse for said company. When he purchased the warehouse, though, there were a lot of problems with it that they didn't know about until much later into development time, sadly, which were electrical, plumbing, and they even found a person who overdosed on the front door and he was dead when they found him. So obviously, knowing all this, they decided to get the hell out of there as soon as humanly possible. But they were unable to do so for, I believe, a year or two. But as soon as they did, they kept to work at the game. They found out that the code for the game was a little bit underdeveloped. And what I mean by that is the code was so bad they had to hire 8 extra people just to fix it. So that way it could be playable for players, by the way, were just volunteer people. They didn't even have the money to even pay for these guys. And then, just when you thought it was over, the way they created the levels in the game, they actually had 2 people do it. So, as you can imagine, there's 2 separate versions of the same world. And yeah, that's a little bit tricky to organize. So ultimately, it came with more problems than solutions, so they just trashed that idea entirely, for good reason. Another problem that arose was the fact that Tim, sadly, he wasn't there to direct the team as he wanted, because he was actually carrying so many responsibilities that he was actually not at the office as much as he wanted to be, which, as you can guess, caused more problems for the development team and for himself, and it pretty much causes this bridge between what he wanted, what they wanted, and it just grew and grew as time went on forward. And to top it all off, this game was actually an exclusive for Xbox, but sadly, Xbox was not having the long development time. So, Double Fine was actually forced to, well, make a demo, whether it was finished or not. Luckily, it was finished, and Microsoft was happy to boot. But then tragedy struck once again, with a person named Ed Fries, who was an executive at Microsoft. He unfortunately left the company, and in doing so, Microsoft went ahead and detached from Double Fine, saying that they were expensive and late majority of the time. And now, just when they had as little funding as humanly possibly could, have even less. But luck was on their side because with good money management, they were able to make up for that. And soon they found another publisher for the game. It was Majesco. The only thing is that they were in heavy crunch time, along with Majesco making a deal with them, which only allowed them to not hire any more new employees, which was bad news for them. But after weighing in the con and pros, they accepted it anyways, even though they did need new members. And right after finishing the game, Majesco went ahead and announced that the game would also be played on PlayStation 2, which Double Fine had no idea who was going to do that. But Majesco had an answer, and that was Buttcats. After the game was finished and shipped out, the game that was projected to make millions didn't end up making millions, sadly, and it was viewed as a failure. Fast forward though to 2011, and Majesco no longer had the rights to Psychonauts. So Double Fine found this as an opportunity, swooped in, got their rights back, and they actually ported the games to more modern day consoles, including Windows. And their plan worked. It actually sold over 1 million copies, and it actually gained a cult following a couple years later as well. And with all of that happening, they could finally rest ease knowing that Psychonauts eventually did succeed. So we start off with a little campfire, a group of kids around it, and you actually see that there's a teacher up there giving a little speech about what it means to be a psychonaut. And just from what we gathered, it's basically just I guess you could say, a superhero that could use, obviously, mental powers. And the whole point of this little camp is for these kids to actually learn how to be a psychonaut. And we find out the teacher who's actually giving this speech is called Coach Oleander, and he has two assistants with him, Sasha and Mila. So we see that there's actually something that's in the forest that's scaring the kids. And when the teachers decide to find out it's actually Raz, the main character we're going to be playing as throughout this entire game, who really wants to be a psychonaut, but in order to actually make it to camp, he actually ran away from his home. And so upon listening to this, the teachers decide to send him back home. But they are unable to wait for his dad to come pick him up. But in the meantime, he can stay there as long as he doesn't do anything super dangerous. They also come to find out that he has actually strong mental powers within him that have yet to be unlocked. And upon hearing this, Oleander decides to hatch a little plan inside his head. He lets Raz attend his little boot camp he has inside his mind. As soon as Raz meets up with Coach Oleander and the rest of the campers the next morning, they decide to go into his mind. They actually have the ability to go inside anyone's mind to either help it or destroy it completely, depending on the person doing it. And like I said, this is a little boot camp to teach younglings how to use their mental powers. So, as soon as Raz actually decides to get in there, he completes the course, and he's actually shown to be the only one who's actually able to complete it. And upon completing it, Raz actually goes inside this white room, and as soon as he does, Oleander stops him and tells him to get out of there. He sends Raz, along with the other campers inside his mind, back out. As soon as Raz gets out of Oleander's mind, he actually meets Sasha, who is an official Psychonauts member, and as well as sharing the same common interest in Raz as Coach Oleander does, Sasha invites Raz to his lab, but he gives him a stern warning that he isn't supposed to be doing this. So, if Raz so happens to find his lab, he'll give Raz a little bit of a special lesson, if you will. Of course, Raz being Raz and wanting to be an official Psychonauts member as soon as humanly possible, he takes Sasha on his offer. And so, upon looking for Sasha's lab, Raz is finally able to find it. And as soon as he goes into it, he finds out that Sasha is actually using this brain tumbler, I believe it was called. So there's actually two ways a psychonaut can go inside someone's mind The first one is using his brain tumbler, but you can only use it for that person who's in the room using it. Or you can use a more mobile item, which is a door, which you throw at someone's head and it just unlocks their brain, like you saw earlier in the video. So that's the whole reason why Sasha has this thing called a brain tumbler, and he uses it on Raz to go inside his mind. But upon going inside Raz's mind to unlock his inner power, they find that for some reason Raz has this weird obsession with meat, but Raz comments on that he actually doesn't really love meat to this extent, and upon following his rabbit, that seems to be a symbol of something inside Raz's mental psyche. After a couple seconds of following the white rabbit, or bunny, honestly, I don't really know what it is. I think it's a bunny, but who gives a fuck? Raz actually meets this creature with eyes that tried to capture Raz. Upon Sasha hearing this, pulls him out immediately. And upon pulling him out, he tells Raz that he can't actually do anything, which is actually true when you start the game. You don't have any particular move set, to be perfectly honest. And so Sasha gives Raz the okay to go learn some actual psychic moves to help him on his journey in order to actually pass this mysterious beast that he met. Now, even though Sasha actually gives Raz the okay to learn how to fight with his mind, he can't actually teach him. He has to get a learner permit. And in order to get a learner permit, he has to go meet an agent called Ford Kruller, who you might have noticed I didn't actually mention in the opening part of the story. And the reason for that is I don't really have a clear segment or cutaway, I guess I should say. But upon starting the game, I actually explored the camp, and I actually found a character who is an old man who you probably guess is in different outfits and talks like a completely different person every time you meet him. So I won't say exactly what's going on with him, but if you're smart, you can probably guess it from a mile away, like I did. We go find Agent Ford, and upon finding him, he actually tells us that he's actually one of the legendary Psychonauts. And Raz actually comments on this, mentioning that he actually knows about him from when they used to do news stuff on him. But as soon as we meet him, Ford sees that Raz has to get a learner's permit in order to fight with his mind with Sasha. So Ford gives him the okay, and we head back to Sasha's lab. As soon as we get back to Sasha's lab, he actually teaches us how to fight, and he gives us our very first psychic ability, which is called Psychic Blast, which, like the name states, you're basically using your mind to shoot out a little beam to hurt enemies. Sasha gives us a little shooting gallery to actually play around with. We play around with it a little bit, and then he tells us that in order to actually get the badge on this ability, we have to train for 3 weeks. Raz gets a little bit pissy about that for obvious reasons, and so he actually decides to mess with Sasha's training level and cranks it up to max. Upon doing this, he actually creates a little bit of a havoc for Sasha's mind. Oh, and by the way, we're in Sasha's mind. I don't know if I mentioned that before. Sasha figures out that Raz is doing this, and so he comes back and tells Raz to close it all up. Upon closing it all up, he actually makes it worse. The reason he makes it worse is because he's building up all the emotional stress inside Sasha's mind. And so he actually creates this giant form of a sensor, which I actually haven't mentioned what a sensor is. It's basically what the mind creates to protect itself. That's why they're actually attacking me upon seeing me. So, upon from all the stress, he makes a mega sensor that we have to fight in order to save Sasha from it. Upon defeating it, Sasha's actually amazed by her skill and ability. After learning how to fight correctly, we go back into Raz's mind to figure out what was up with the whole rabbit and monster with eyes thing. So upon going back into Raz's mind, we defeat the monster and we adventure forth in Raz's mind. we see that the rabbit is leading us to this tower-like building, and as soon as we start climbing it, we find out that there's a character named Dogen, who I haven't mentioned yet. He's actually one of the many campers, which I'll be going into the campers in just a second, but first off, we gotta focus on Dogen. So, we see that Rabbit is trying to tell us to rescue Dogen from this dentist-like character. Even though he's a dentist, he tries to surgically remove Dogen's brain out. He doesn't state why as to yet, but we'll try to figure it out later, because as soon as we do try to climb up the tower even more so to get closer to Dogen and try to save him, we actually are unable to do so because we need another ability that we have yet to learn, which is Levitation. And Sasha comments about this and says the only way to learn Levitation is to learn it from Mila, who is the other Psychonaut on the campus. We go over to the lake and we actually find out a little cool fact. So Raz is actually afraid of water, or to be more precise, he's not really afraid of water. It's just that his family was actually cursed by another psychic to ultimately die in water whenever they get in it. So that's the whole reason why Raz is actually not afraid but more cautious around water. But ultimately, he figures out a way to get to Mila, and as soon as we get to Mila, we find out that she's also holding a training session for Levitation. Right before the training session with Mila, we actually find out another camper who goes by the name Lily, who actually makes fun of Raz about this and that, and Raz actually lets it slip about the whole Dogen getting his brain snatched, and Lily comments on this, saying that she actually knows what's up about it, because she thought it was always a nightmare, but the fact that Raz saw it too means that it's not a nightmare. And so the two decide to meet up later tonight at midnight to figure out what's exactly going on with that. Upon going inside Mila's mind, and upon completing her little course of how to use Levitation, the okay to use it outside her psychic mind. And she gives us a badge for it as proof. So obviously, upon learning the Levitation Ball psychic ability, we go back to Raz's mind, and then we venture forward to where we actually see Dogen gets his brain not surgically removed. They actually use this sneezing powder, and he kind of just sneezes it out of his head, or his mouth, I should say, which is honestly a little bit disgusting when you think about it, but let's try not to think about it too much now. So, upon sneezing his brain out, the dentist decides to throw it down the chute. So, we venture inside the actual building itself and go down the chute to try to get Dogen's brain back. Upon trying to get his brain back, we see that Dogen's brain is actually hooked up to this machine, and it attacks us inside this little tank-like structure. And so we destroy the tank and actually save Dogen's brain, or so we think, because as soon as we destroy the tank machine, we're actually brought back to that room I mentioned before in Orlander's head, where it's actually seemingly confirming that he might be the one kidnapping kids and stealing their brains. So upon hearing this, he tries to tell Sasha, who Sasha is actually not having it, and he goes outside to go do some official Psychonauts business. So Raz's only choice for actual help is Lily. So he goes to meet up Lily at the lake, and upon meeting up Lily, Lily gets all excited about this and actually almost kisses Raz, which I know it's very sudden, but I mean, they kind of just bring it out to you out of nowhere, where there's really no chemistry between the characters. I mean, there is a scene, it's totally optional, because I actually randomly found it when I was exploring the camp, like I mentioned before, where Raz and Liz have this little conversation with friendship bracelets after seeing these two characters having the same thing, and it's just a little funny scene that I guess is a little bit of a hint at their future relationship, but not really. But other than that, there's really no connection between the two characters, so I feel like this is a little bit rushed and just not planned out as they thought it was. So after this little make-out session, Raz is actually taken back from this, and he tries to calm her down and talk about it still. And upon doing so, they actually find out that right beside them is this creature from the lake who kidnaps Lily and takes her underwater. And upon seeing this, Rastus can't help but try to save her. After the lungfish kidnaps Lily, Raz decides to go after it. But as you remember, he's afraid of water, or technically. So he actually borrows a submarine that the camp decides to just own, I guess. I don't really know why. Upon taking it for a ride, he's able to find the lungfish and he decides to fight it. Upon beating the lungfish, it actually comes out that the lungfish isn't actually doing it because it wants to. It's doing it because the coach actually mind controlled it to do its bidding, and that's why the lungfish has been acting pretty weird lately. So we decide to go inside the lungfish's mind. Upon going into it, we find the coach's mental image, I guess you could say. So upon defeating him, he admits to it that he is the one doing everything. Because we never actually did have physical proof up until now. Even then, it's not physical, it's just him telling us, but you get the picture. And upon him telling us that, he dips out of the mine, and so do we. Upon leaving, we actually talk to the lungfish, who is actually capable of speaking, which is honestly pretty cool. And we find out that the lungfish is actually a she, and her name is Linda. So Linda actually tells us where Lily is, and she decides to take us to the island. Upon going to the island, we meet the gatekeeper, who, as the name suggests, gate keeps the gate. And so upon asking him if we could actually go through the gate, he says that even though he's a gatekeeper, he doesn't actually have the key. The milkman has the key. And as you can suggest from how he's looking, he's also another character with a split personality. So we decide to go into his mind to try to rearrange it a little bit to actually find out where the milkman is, and upon getting the key, hopefully, we find the milkman, and Raz acts a little bit surprised that the milkman is actually Billy, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward that it's obviously Billy, and Billy is actually the name of this character that I just forgot to mention thus far. So Billy turns into the milkman, and upon turning into the milkman, he's a little bit fire happy, you could say. So upon letting us in, he actually decides to try to burn down the asylum, which is our next destination. Or I would say, if we didn't have a predestination, and that predestination is actually the ex-actress Gloria, who used to be famous, but she kind of lost her mojo for unknown reasons, at least for now. So we go inside her mind to try to help her out a little bit. And before I go any further, we're essentially just going to be going inside people's minds and helping them pretty much have a better life. So excuse me for being a little bit less discreet on details here and there. Upon going inside Gloria's mind, we do figure out that the reason she kind of lost her mojo and went a little bit crazy is because her mother actually committed suicide. And upon helping her with this subject and getting her mojo back, as you can guess, is not crazy anymore and doesn't need to be in an asylum. She gives us her ex trophy, which I'll get into that in just a few minutes. Before continuing any further though, I have to mention the game is very open, if I do say so myself. And what I mean by open, it doesn't really care what order you do stuff in. Now, of course, it has a main story that you have to follow. But what I mean is, there are side objectives that you can do, like a scavenger hunt and etc. And that's what I mean by it's very open. Those side objectives you can pretty much do in whichever order you particularly want at any given time. So, in this part of the game, I decided to go back to the mainland. I went back to Ford's headquarters, and Ford actually informs us that all the campers had their brains stolen when we weren't looking. Now, when the hell that happened, I don't really know, since it doesn't look like it took us that long from when we actually had to go fight the lungfish to going to the asylum and all that stuff. But nevertheless, the coach actually managed to do it. He captured everyone's brain. And if you're wondering where Sasha and Mila is, well, they're actually on official Psychonauts business, whatever that means. So we'll try to figure out what happened to them later, though. But first, you're actually tasked with saving everyone's brain, but I'm actually not sure if you're forced into it or not. Now, of course, I actually decided to 100% this game, so I did end up getting everyone's brain, but I feel like the game would have actually let you continue to the final area without doing so. So don't quote me on that, but I think that's an actual just extra thing. Going back to the campers, I feel like these are actually well done characters, but their main stick is just the main stick and doesn't actually develop into something more. In fact, I think it would have been interesting to see us diving into their minds more so than the characters we actually did end up diving the minds into. And another thing that I actually have forgotten to mention. So, if you're thinking about like psychics and shit like that, how they came to be, they actually have an answer for that. And it's almost entirely just a side conversation, which is really weird. I mean, they mention it in the main story, but it's not really forced for you to actually learn of it. So you can totally beat the game without knowing any of this lore. Psychics never did exist in the beginning of time. There's actually a meteorite that crashed land on Earth, and the material that actually came off the meteorite was called titanium, and that's actually what gave everyone their psychic abilities. And now I guess it's like hereditary to where it's just passed down upon family generation. They don't exactly go into that aspect of the game, but that's just what I'm assuming. Think of it more like the X-Men's, I guess you could say. How the X-Men actually came to be with the mutants and all that. And you know how I just said that there was material that came off the meteorite called titanium? So titanium is also used for Ford's condition. He can actually use this to make himself Ford instead of making himself Ford the janitor, Ford the ranger, Ford whatever. You get the picture. And as you can tell, this is one of the main reasons why he actually doesn't help you and also doesn't really do anything inside the game. And another cool fact is if you actually go out at night during the game, you can fight wild animals. And if you're wondering why these wild animals actually have psychic abilities, the game actually explains that too, which I find pretty cool actually. So there's actually titanium in the water and food that was actually given to the animals. So that's why the animals actually developed these psychic abilities, which, like I said, I think that's pretty cool that the game actually decides to mention that and explain why that is to be. So, getting back to the main story, we actually to go further into the asylum, and upon going further into the asylum, we find multiple characters which, like I said before, I'm going to go ahead and just try to speed run this topic. The first character you meet after Gloria is Ford, who has also another split personality, which I didn't really mention this when I was playing the game, but a lot of these characters have just split personality issues, which, I mean, there's more mental illnesses than that, but I guess that's fine. And his split personality is Napoleon. He's actually related to Napoleon, believe it or not. So upon hearing this, we go inside his mind to actually fix him up as well. And after fixing him up, he decides to give us his straitjacket because, well, he doesn't actually need it. And a little cool fact is he's actually one of the members of the asylum, and he was the one who's actually keeping everyone in. But he actually turned insane himself because of another character who, the name of this character actually escapes me, but he looks like this. And he's actually the one who made Fred go insane in the first place, which is why you'll get to see Fred get his well-deserved payback. After helping out Fred, we find another character who is also struggling with his inner mind. Upon speaking to him, he's actually a artist, and so he tells us his problem is that he can never finish his painting, and he doesn't really know why. It's almost like he just lost his mojo like magic. So upon hearing this, we also try to help him out, and after helping him out, we figure out that the reason he lost his mojo was because of a girl. Which, I mean, that's relatable, but I mean, goddamn, man, like, really? You almost broke your mind because of that? And frankly, he's a bit of a bitch. But after sorting out his girl troubles, he's actually able to finish the painting. And upon finishing the painting, he decides to give us the painting of the dentist. And you know how I said that Fred gave us a straitjacket and Gloria gave her the trophy that looks like a claw? Well, this is all because of the character that I mentioned before that made Fred go insane. So he's actually kind of blind, so he mistakenly believes us to be the dentist after putting on the painting, the straitjacket, and the claw. And he decides to step aside and let us go up the elevator. But right before we go up to the elevator, we see that very well deserved payback that Fred got after going insane because of this guy. So we take the elevator up, and as we explore more of the asylum, we end up freeing all the brains of the campers. They don't really make it a big deal. This is why I suggest that, and this might be another side activity. But we put the brains in all the kids, and, well, they don't really do anything to help us. It's just they go off and do their own thing, and you can talk to them if you want, but it's just really stale dialogue. And as we venture further into the asylum, we find a mysterious figure who keeps on laughing, or almost like she's weeping, and she keeps on just appearing and disappearing as we venture forward. And we actually find out that it's a girl who's being manipulated by the dentist because she has a pet turtle, and the dentist is threatening to eat the turtle if she does not obey him by her getting brains to give to him. So we devise a plan on freeing the turtle, that way she's free to do whatever she wants. And upon doing this, we come to find out that Lily, Sasha, and Mila are in the room below the dentist, who also have their brains not inside their bodies. So after rescuing the turtle, we put its brain inside the brain tank when the dentist wasn't looking, and we blow him up, and he just kind of disappears without another word. Sasha and Mila, their brains back, and upon giving them the brains back, they actually break Lily out. We come face to face with the coach. But in a quick, annoying way, might I add, Sasha and Mila says that we're too much of a kid and we can't handle him just yet. So she pushes Raz and Lily outside the asylum to safe grounds. But who would have guessed, the coach is actually still alive. Even though his brain is missing, his brain actually managed to hit the brain tank. So upon hitting the brain tank, he actually takes out Sasha, Mila, Lily, and Ford, who decided to come and see what's up. And so the only person who's available is, of course, you guessed it, Raz. So in one final boss fight, or at least that's what you think, we take out the coach. And upon taking him out, he actually still had some extra sneezing powder, and so he uses it on Raz, and Raz ultimately sneezes out his own brain. And upon sneezing out his own brain, he decides to get this smart idea where he decides to go inside the brain tank along with the coach's brain, and it kind of just gets tangled up. And so, like I said, this is actually the true final area. The true final area looks like it's actually a combine both Raz's memories and the coach's memories, because upon this area we find the coach as a young boy, and he is actually obsessed with rabbits, but is actually afraid of a character named the Butcher. So we actually have to keep him safe, because whatever happens to him will happen to us. Upon exploring more of this final area of the combination of a carnival and a meat factory, it looks like, we come to figure out that the coach, when he was a little boy, actually witnessed his father, the Butcher, murder all the little rabbits that he was trying to protect. And upon doing this, this kind of scarred the coach into a more negative space, which is why he actually ends up becoming who he ends up becoming. Upon defeating the Butcher, we rescue the bunnies along with rescuing the coach. But remember how I said this is a combined effort of Raz's memories and the coach's memories? As you could have guessed, Raz's dad actually appears, and he kind of just messes around with Raz, saying that he's a psychic, he hates psychics, and blah 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 blah. So upon going through Raz's dad's tests, our real father actually decides to show up, who, might I add, looks a bit of a bum. I don't really know why he does. They don't really explain that. It's just something I've noticed. And yet, in other art and promotional teases, he actually looks a bit more sharp. I don't really know why. It's just something I saw. Raz's dad actually admits to Raz that he never actually hates sidekicks. He actually just wanted Raz to be happy, which they never actually explained why Raz came to the conclusion that he doesn't like him. So I don't really know what the point A to point B was, but it just goes to be left unanswered. Raz's imaginary father decides to help out the butcher, so now we have two enemies to worry about. But upon defeating him, they also decide to do a little fusion, if you would. But instead of looking cool like Gogeta or something, they just look like this hulking pile of, I guess you could say, meat. Our father actually decides to help us out and give us all the psychic energy that he can muster. Upon doing this, Raz actually has the ability to transform into pretty much a giant, I guess you could say, and defeats, once and for all, might I add, the butcher and Raz's imaginary father. Upon doing this, the coach actually comes back to his senses, he says, which I don't really know what he means by that, because it doesn't really make sense that he saw his rabbits get murdered, so he decides to kidnap the camper's brains. But whatever, I guess that's also just gonna be left unanswered. And he apologizes for what he's doing, and upon doing this, Sasha and Mila, including Ford and the coach, decide to give Raz for all of his efforts for saving the camp, saving the campers, and all that stuff, and decide to actually make him an official Psychonaut. Upon becoming an official Psychonaut, he still has to go with his father, and this is where we get to see Raz and Lily's final goodbye. Upon saying goodbye to each other, Sasha and Mila actually rudely interrupts us and says that Lily's father was kidnapped, and get this, Lily's father is actually the head honcho of the Psychonauts Associate, which I don't really know why they decided to drop that giant bombshell of news, but they did so anyways. And upon hearing this, they decide to recruit Raz once again to try to rescue Lily's father, and they go off into a jet, never to be heard from again, and the credits roll. Yeah, that was the story of Psychonauts. It's actually a pretty good and interesting story, might I add, with a few inconsistencies here and there, but overall, a fun story if you're into that. The controls and gameplay elements. First up, the controls. So, this is actually a 3D platformer, as you could have guessed. It being a 3D platformer, obviously, you can move around with the left stick, move the camera with the right stick, jump with the X button. And since we're on the topic of platforming, the platforming in this game isn't actually that bad. There's really no sections that it's too terribly tough in, unless you're intentionally trying to break the segments, which I ended up doing a lot so in this game than I thought I would have. So it did make the platforming a little bit difficult, but honestly, it's not too bad. So if it's going to be your first 3D platformer, it's not a bad game to start off with. The only thing that really did trigger me, like I mentioned before, is the camera. The camera automatically moves back into the center of the screen, so you're constantly fighting with it in each platforming jump that you make, as you can see with the gameplay I'm showing right now. And another thing that makes it terrible is there's no jump shadow like in Crash Bandicoot 4, which is kind of a problem when you think about it. Do a little 3-hit combo with the square button. Triangle and circle buttons don't actually really do anything particularly interesting in terms of gameplay other than menu options. But this being a 3D platformer, you also have enemies. I already mentioned the sensors and the animals. Other than that, there's really no vast enemy encounters. I mean, you have the regular sensors, which only do melee attacks. Then you have the bigger ones, which can shoot at you. And then you have the bigger ones, which can also just do melee attacks. I know, pretty cool. Anyways, with these enemies, you can actually lock on to any one of them with a pretty much Zelda lock-on camera angle with the left bumper. And as you can figure, this being a psychic-focused game, there's also many psychic abilities which you can use in combat. We already went over Psychic Blast, but you have many more. You have Pyrokinesis, which Like the name states, you can burn shit. Then you have Levitation, which you already go over, and the name's pretty self-explanatory. Then you have Invisibility, which you can go invisible. Then you have Clairvoyance, which is actually a pretty interesting power-up. Nothing really gameplay shattering. It's just a cool little character detail that you might be into, you might not. Clairvoyance, you can actually see what people think of you. Almost all the characters have unique visions of Raz himself, which is honestly a pretty cool detail when you actually get down to it. Along with certain items which you can see what they can do for you. For example, back in the artist world, you have roses and paintings which you can see on what they would do if you actually use them in the world. Then you have telekinesis, which you can just move shit with your mind. You have the confusion bomb, which is a confusion bomb. Then lastly, the shield, which, as you can guess, is a shield that prevents you from getting any type of damage. All these powers are actually really cool and fun to use, but overall, the game doesn't really use them for its full potential, I feel like. Most of these are just situational based, or instead of using the Sight Blast, I could just put this enemy on fire, and vice versa, which is kind of lame and a little bit sad to see that these powers are kind of underused. I mean, the only power that I could legitimately say is the most useful and the most used is Levitation for obvious reasons, allowing you to jump higher than normal, along with going faster and having a slower descent upon falling. And as I mentioned, there's a little bit of combat in this game, which it's nothing too groundbreaking. It's just more of an obstacle rather than an actual enemy attack. Because most of these guys either go down in 2 hits or in 6, which can get a little bit annoying, especially when they just keep on respawning in certain areas. And you really don't have that many interesting enemies. I mean, sure, in the Waterloo area, there is a cannon enemy which you actually use your pyrokinesis on, but other than him, there's really no enemies that actually make you use another power up. For instance, I know I just said a pyrokinesis enemy, but you're not going to be going to another person's head and fighting ice cubes, and you have to use both your melee combo and the pyrokinesis ability, or maybe there's this really heavy enemy, you have to use telekinesis to flip it upside down and then do a ground pound on it. You're not going to be seeing any interesting enemy combos like that, unfortunately. It's just a straightforward, you either punch them, shoot them, or burn them, and that's really about it. Or you can do the most easiest option, I feel like, and just run past them. Now, the way you actually acquire some of these powers are either going to another mental world or actually upgrading your psi rank, which your psi rank is just a measure of how strong, I guess, you are in terms of mental capacity. Now, in order to upgrade your rank, there's actually quite a few methods on upgrading your rank, which I will be going over now. The first and most common one is your psi cards, and your psi cards are pretty much located in the actual real world somewhere. Some are actually quite hidden, while others are just out in plain sight. Which each 9 cards you collect is actually a whole core, and a psychic core is actually just a whole rank up essentially. And those are actually scoured in the world as well. And in order to combine the 9 cards you have to buy a psi core. And in order to buy a psi core, you have to have arrowheads. And arrowheads, as I mentioned before earlier in the video, remember how I said that meteorite had titanium and was pretty much just busted around the world? Well, quite a long time ago, the Indians actually found it and used it for their arrowheads. And upon their end, they decided to bury arrowheads that were made of pure titanium. And so these are essentially just, if you would, Mario coins. You can use them to buy either a Dream Fluff, which a Dream Fluff is just a 1-up essentially, if I had to compare it to anything. And you might be wondering where you actually buy all this stuff. You can actually buy it from the camp store, which is run by Ford and one of his many personalities. You can also buy a few other items I didn't really mention because they're not really super important. Like I mentioned, you can also buy Psychors. And as soon as you do buy a Psychor, you actually have to go to Ford's lab and use one of the machines to combine the 9 cars into a Psychor to make it a full psychic core. And now for all the mental stuff. The first one is figments, which are essentially just, as I like to put it, those people's imagination. For instance, the coach's boot camp, which is the first area you go into, most of his are like military stuff and etc. You kind of get the picture. And collecting 100 of those can actually give you 1 rank up as well. And upon exploring, you might also find a mental cobweb. In order to collect these, actually, you need a mental cobweb machine, which is also sold at the camp. You buy one of those, and you can actually use that item to collect cobwebs. Upon collecting these cobwebs, you can go back to Ford's lab and use a machine to give you another full psychic core to rank you up. Another one of these collectibles in the mental world is actually emotional baggage, which, haha, funny pun, it says literal emotional baggage, which you have to find zippers and everything to actually zip each one up. And upon doing so, you actually do get a kind of a bonus item, which isn't really particularly fun unless you're into this type of thing, which is behind the scenes concept art of each world. Depending on each mental world, some are bigger than the other ones. So you can actually find a teleporter, and once you activate it, you can obviously teleport to each section that there is a teleporter on to make for a somewhat fast travel system. And like I said, there is a combat system. So therefore, being a combat system, you obviously have health. So one of the cool things that the game decides to do, they really go into the whole psychic shit, as I mentioned, with the figment, the emotional baggage, and I almost forgot vaults, which are pretty much just memories that can either be very funny, for instance, Sasha seeing his mom's tits, to being kind of serious, to Mila seeing all the children she used to babysit burn alive in a fire. And you would have guessed it by now, if you're actually smart, that is. If you lose health, you actually recover health by getting positive mental health, which is a kind of funny thing, especially nowadays with people having mental problems and just huge amounts of depression with how the world is now. Now to go into more of the game's positives and negatives, at least for me personally. So, for instance, you know how I said each person has a own mental world? That statement is actually proven true. You actually have each person having their own distinct world, its own distinct figments, memory vaults, and etc., which I find very interesting and just outright cool. They're not just a simple copy and paste. It's actually different. For instance, the artist world. Look at this. This is incredible, might I add. Then you have the military boot camp from the coach's mind. You see how different these two distinctly are? And then you have my favorite world, which is the Waterloo World, which pretty much is just a whole outright callback to that one board game, which I actually don't know the name of, so hopefully I'll look it up when I'm editing this video so I can put it on the screen. And I know I didn't really mention this a whole lot, but the humor of this game is actually really just outright good, along with just how each character interacts with another. One of its strong points is the characters interacting with one another, which I always find entertaining and just outright interesting. There's never a moment where I didn't want to talk to a certain character because they always had something interesting to say. Rather than just having bleak dialogue like, you have to go to this area, blah, blah, blah. They actually outright said something interesting, which was very compelling to me. Like with the mental powers, it's also just outright fun to explore each area. whether it's in the real world or the mental world, because you never know what you're going to find. Now, for the negatives of this game, they really don't outright stand out unless you're 100% in the game like I was doing. You know how I said there are figments, and they're essentially just star coins from a Mario game? Well, you can't actually figure out where each one is in each mental world. So, for example, if you're just missing one, I fucking, just one, you have to explore the whole goddamn world again, like you just started it. And it's honestly frustrating. I'm just, oh my, I know I just praise it, but the artist's world, oh my fuck, I love it just aesthetically, but my god, the figments were just insane. Some of these you just had to fucking just guess. Hell, one of them I had to fucking look it up. Like, the majority of this game I pretty much just completed by myself using my own skills I've learned from other platformers such as Mario, Donkey Kong, Kirby, etc. But nah, this fucking game sometimes piss me the fuck off. I just cannot convince you how difficult some of these figments were. For instance, I know I just said the Waterloo was my favorite world, which it absolutely is. It's an amazing world. But what the fuck is this? I repeat, what the fuck is this? Okay, I recorded this way too many times to fuck up now. I don't have footage for the thing I'm talking about and I'm ranting about, so yeah, it's pretty much just a needle in a haystack and it was fucking stupid, okay? That's all you guys need to know. But hell, I probably need a Psychonaut out of this fucking game, just in terms of a 100% completion, might I add. Because if you're not going for 100%, this game is actually relatively fucking fun. I know I'm not really showing it right now, but believe me, it really is. It's definitely worth it if you're into a 3D platformer that has a little bit of a personality and isn't afraid to show it. But before I forget, let's talk about the final area. So, I didn't really mention this before because it's not really a huge thing. There are rails in this game. There's not really a whole ton of rails, but the way they worked, I really couldn't fucking tell you because whoever programmed this shit didn't know what they were doing and never actually played a Crash Bandicoot or whatever game that has a rail grinding segment in it that's a 3D platformer. So the way it works is you get on it and all you can do is jump and punch. And if there's another rail on the left side of you or the right side, you can actually jump over to it. Sounds pretty easy, right? Well, in the final area, there's this one figment that you cannot get unless you fucking jump off the goddamn rail. Now I know, you might be saying, well, that's not so hard. It is. Because the thing about falling to your death, now in any other platformer, you might just get like a heart taken out of, right? No. In this game, you have fucking lives. And you only have a certain amount of lives. So guess what? If you get a game over, yes, it's not really that punishing, but it's very fucking annoying because you gotta go through the whole goddamn area again. As if you just started it. Now you do get your figments, mental cobwebs, evolves, emotional baggage saved, but you still have to go through the area. And if you didn't unlock the teleporter, yeah, you're kind of just gonna have to go through the area. And with how the final area is set up, it's kind of annoying. Not ghosts and goblins annoying, but just annoying nevertheless. And as I've been saying through this whole segment, this game is worth it. Don't have me negatively convincing you that it's a bad game or badly programmed. It's not. It's just, I really couldn't help but get that off my chest. Because, as I already mentioned, the characters, the music, which, okay, the music, it wasn't really a hit for me. Now, do they fit the aesthetic for each world? Definitely. Like, you're in this asylum, you're expecting a very spooky like music. Well, guess what? There's a spooky like music for that area. Nothing really too outstanding, just okay. So I just dead ass did not record a outro like at all for some reason. So here it is. Have a good morning, good night where you're at, and if it's your birthday, happy birthday, and hopefully you have a peaceful day. The next time you'll be seeing me is when we actually do the follow-up sequel to this game, Psychonauts 2.